Hey, what's up? How's everybody doing? We have Redline with us right now. I figured I'd try to get him into a discussion with us. These last few weeks, I've been having a lot of discussions with people that I've been pretty much avoiding for a long period of time. Um, I figure, maybe I shouldn't be too uptight and just, ban people that um, I've had problems with in the past, give them second chances. Um, Redline has had some disagreements with me in the past over my intelligent design argument. I'm going to give him the floor to express all of his disagreements on ID. The floor is yours, Redline.
Well, I don't necessarily have any particular disagreements, just with essentially everything that you've been saying for the past, I don't know, as long as you've been here. You've made some claims that, for example, the stuff going on inside a cell isn't purely chemistry, but we haven't seen any evidence for that. I also have seen you, a couple times, especially with the conversations you had with R and Raw about in regards to dinosaur bones. Now, I don't remember exactly what the disagreement was. I'm sure I can bring it up again, or bring up the video again in question, but I don't remember ever getting a reply from you in regards to that video. So I guess you want to start with cell, the stuff that's going on inside the cell and how it's not just chemistry and how you can demonstrate that in any way, shape, or form?
Well, do you know what happens in typical chemical bonds, right?
I don't know anything about biology or chemistry or anything like that. I'm asking for the explanation.
Well, if you had an understanding of chemistry, that the answer would pretty much be pretty clear because in chemical bonds with covalent ionic bonds where you have sharing of different electrons or differences in electronegativity with anions or cations, that's pretty much what happens, the sharing of electrons and so forth, things like that. With DNA, how that's being manipulated inside the cell, it's not just chemistry as in the result of just chemical interactions. You have a molecule being manipulated by different components like the beta clamps, DNA gyrase, the helicase, different components. And you also have, the uh, translation effect with DNA as well, which is different in prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. So obviously the interactions with the components inside of the cell is something that is distinct from just mere chemical reactions. It's not just chemistry. It's not just the results, even from a a standpoint right now, an objective standpoint, independent from a conclusion of being the result of evolution, abiogenesis, or intelligent design. It's not just chemistry. Obviously, there are different components operating in there that are distinct from just pure chemical reactions.
And why is it that when we have people who study in the field, they don't actually agree with you on this one? Because I remember you made a video that Sam actually took the liberty of replying to when it came to the stuff going on inside the cell as just chemistry. And Sam seems to be the one who completely disagrees with you. Now, if it is as obvious as you say it is, how come he doesn't get it and he's going in for his PhD on the matter?
Well, I sort of think I was hoping that you would actually bring something up to talk about the topic, but I'm really surprised
I
that
am. This is part of the topic.
hold on, hold on,
You said
hold on
that
a
this is
second. Well,
obvious.
well, like I said from the beginning, I don't want there to be any interruptions. I'll wait for you to finish, and then I'll respond as well. First of all, this is just going to turn into something that's just a drama issue. The second thing is that Sam isn't a chemist, so he doesn't work on this on his field. He works with DNA. Well, I think he works with DNA. I think he's got a degree in biology, but he's not a chemist and he's not a biochemist. These are separate fields. Now, I wouldn't just throw Sam out the window because Sam is a smart guy. He probably knows about some of these things as well, but that's not to say that these are in his field. Fiona, for example, this is not in her field. She has a degree in molecular biology. She's not a biochemist or a chemist, but it's not like I'm going to throw out their opinions or what they have to say about this issue, but they are not authorities on these topics.
And what about actual chemists? Like, for example, Thunderfoot?
Well, can you explain? Can you show where?
Show what? Show what?
Can you show where he's actually said this, where he's agreeing with what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that he is a chemist, and yet he is an atheist. And he's a chemist that has never at all, under any circumstances, say that the stuff going on inside the cell is not chemistry. In fact, if he was, if he was actually studying in the field, which he does, and he is a chemist, which he is, then wouldn't he actually come out and also say and agree with you that it's, quote, not just chemistry? When in fact, I talked to him behind the scenes, and I can say with strict confidence that he doesn't actually agree with that. And my question is this: if it is as obvious as you say it is, how come the people who work in the field, who, like let's say biology or chemistry, we have many people that work in varying fields that circle or even hit the bullseye on this certain issue, and they seem to hold a different opinion if it is so obvious anyone can see it?
Well, you keep saying that. You keep saying that there are people that work in the field and they agree with you, or they're not agreeing with what I'm saying, but you're not being very specific. I would agree with you that it's very clear that Thunderfoot is against, creationism or intelligent design altogether, but I would disagree with him, and I'd have a talk with him if you wanted to have a discussion. Guy probably doesn't even know who I am.
Yeah, but that wasn't my question.
That's the reason why that's the reason why I'm saying, where are you getting this conclusion that he would agree with you, that he would disagree with my analysis of DNA? Because my analysis of DNA isn't really an intelligent design thing or an evolutionary thing. That's just, okay, it's a fact that the reactions inside of chemistry are not just what's happening with DNA. There are components that are interacting with DNA, with this molecule of DNA, that is not just chemical reactions. What else did you say?
You're making the claim that it's not just chemistry for this one certain issue.
I want to hit on what you said at the beginning as well, because you've made this claim before in the past, and that's simply not true. There are a lot of scientists out there that are intelligent design advocates who have gone, to all sorts of different universities. Doug Axe, William Dembski, all sorts of scientists that some are who are even agnostic, that support intelligent design. Others, you can say that they're educated. They've been research assistants, like Berlinski, I believe it is, a mathematician, and he's been a research assistant in biology, but he himself he agrees with intelligent design as well. So this little situation, well, my scientists agree with me, your scientists agree with you, doesn't get to the point to what do the facts actually support? What is the actual evidence supporting?
No, the issue is, why is there a discrepancy when you say it's clear? That's the question I'm asking. If there is a discrepancy, which you yourself admitted that there is a discrepancy by admitting that my scientists agree with me, your scientists agree with you, but yet you made the claim that it was obvious. Now, I'm a layman when it comes to the biology and the evolution side of things. My forte is space science, orbits, and how planets form, how stars form, explode, that kind of stuff. That's my forte, so I'm not in on this. But for the people who actually are in on this, it's clear that they do not share this opinion of what's going on inside the cell. And if your claim is that it is obvious, that's obviously not just chemistry, and that there is something else possibly supernatural going on, then how come we haven't heard about it? Or how come there is this big freaking pushback from the vast majority of the scientific community that actually works in the field of biology or chemistry?
Well, there's a lot of things that I think you're misunderstanding right there. The first thing is that I wouldn't even say this is a supernatural argument. No implication of supernatural. Doesn't even prove any specific God in detail. It simply doesn't. It's just an observation of things that we can see in the natural world, and it's a totally physical argument. No one is appealing to whether it's one creator or the other. It just happens to be creation friendly and violates that primacy of atheism, atheism being without theism. The belief in a personal, interactive creator God. Creation is what's being challenged from an atheistic position. So the supernatural isn't even really something that we would touch on just this argumentation right here. But the vast majority, well, it doesn't matter what the vast majority believes in. That doesn't necessarily have any weight either way. That doesn't mean that, well, therefore everybody's supposed to accept it, or that it has some sort of clear validity if the vast majority of people agree that something's true. The vast majority of the people on the planet used to believe that the earth was flat, or that it was held up by a turtle or something like that. Most of the people in different times of history did not believe that the earth was a sphere. So what the vast majority believes or doesn't believe doesn't really mean anything. I mean, that's actually, I would believe, an ad populum fallacy. We can say in the reverse that, well, out of the, how many, 7 billion, 200 million to 300 million people on the planet, the majority of them happen to be Christians or people that have beliefs in gods. About 60% of the planet's population, combined with Islam and Christianity, those are theistic beliefs. So therefore, because we are the majority, theistic beliefs are true. I think it's a fallacious way to approach the argument.
Good thing that's not what I was doing. I was asking why there is a discrepancy to begin with people who work in the field. Because you said it was obvious. If it's obvious to me, let me give you an example of something else that's obvious. It's obvious that my car is red. And anyone can look at my car, see a picture of the car, see a video of my car, see a Facebook post of my car, Google Plus post of my car, and they can tell it's red because it's obvious. It's kind of staring you right in the face. So if I were to then look at, see that there's a discrepancy, I would have to explain why there is that discrepancy. Are they colorblind? Is their monitor not working? Give me something to chew on as to why that discrepancy exists between your scientists that agree with you and my scientists that agree with me.
Well, I think that the answer to that is pretty obvious. I'll give you a saying that I was told growing up: men are made of iron and children are made of clay. It's easy, you can mold a child to believe whatever you want them to believe. Anything that they grow up, they're going to be a product of their environment as they grow up. What you teach them is what they're going to believe when they grow up. Some of these hardened scientists, they've looked at different information from the fossil record, the genetics, DNA, or the similarities of homologous structures, and they see a pattern. So therefore, they've been conditioned to believe that certain things are true. So it's not. If you have certain presuppositions, it's not going to be surprising that you come to a specific conclusion. But when I say that something is obvious, like finding motors, turbines, or a sequence information inside of the cell, right off the bat, it's obvious to everybody that's going to look at that information, looking at their background knowledge. This information, these types of structures and functions have consistently come from intelligence. That is the obvious fact. What is not obvious is that it was some sort of process that led up to this particular complexity. That is a belief, an alternative conclusion that somebody would like or choose to hold to.
Yeah, I'm not going to agree with that, because the way you phrase it, you make it seem like that there is an internal bias within the scientific community to basically crap on your parade. And the scientific method, the way the scientific community works, is that if you do not agree with something, if you do not agree with a certain paper that is written, and a certain paper that's written says something that, for example, disagrees with the notion that it isn't all just chemistry, and I'm sure there's a few out there, can't name them, but I'm sure they're out there, and I'm sure Sam would be more than happy to send a few links your way. You as a person can take that paper, go through it, and systematically debunk it in the way that would be appropriate for that paper. And then, even though you're not a scientist, you can still have it posted so that other scientists can review your work. That's the way the scientific method works. That's the way the scientific community functions. So that bias gets thrown out and the facts are what's left behind. So if this is obvious, then how come none of the scientists that agree with you have put forth this so that it is a known and objective known fact that it's not just chemistry going on within the cell?
Well, that you're getting on a whole bunch of different issues right there. They wouldn't say that. They wouldn't say that it's not just chemistry. No scientist would just say it's just chemistry. It's not just chemistry. That's no article would ever even say anything like that. They would what they would say is abiogenesis. There were simple chemical reactions that led to some sort of some properties or some sort of establishment where you can have some sort of basic life, some sort of processes or events that led up to an established system. But these are separate issues right here. And with the peer-reviewed process, one of the points for the peer-reviewed process is to help to increase knowledge in the scientific literature. I would say that, yes, there are a lot of articles that are in support of evolution, but those articles that are in support of evolution, they do not meet their burden of proof. The claims that are being made in these articles, they don't really fit. For example, if you were going to look for a new anatomical feature or function and birds or reptiles and how they...
Hello?
Did I cut out for a second? Hello?
Yeah, you cut out.
They well, with birds or reptiles, how they breathe, the birds, they breathe in through their lungs. It goes in through a circle of different air sacs, and they come right back out through their beak. They can breathe better than we can, or than reptiles can. Where would be the evidence for that those changes, or are we just seeing homologous structures, and that's what's being written about in the articles, homologous structures, because they have the same or similar operations, therefore they came from one another. That doesn't necessarily meet the burden of proof on the evolutionist side. So yeah, there's in the peer review process, that's something that's happening, but it's not something that is it's not something that's evident. The evidence isn't actually supporting that. And yeah, there have been articles that have been published by the Intelligent Design Institute. I'll give you a link right here from their database of articles that have been published in all sorts of different articles, not their own journals like a lot of people say, but mainstream journals as well.
Okay, and so what about them? I mean, they're coming to a conclusion based on what they're finding, obviously. And so I have heard, for example, YouTubers like the Living Dinosaur, from paleontology, biostratigraphy, genetics, molecular biology. They all seem to support and derive to the same conclusion, that evolution is the way that it all came about. Now, if evolution has all these holes in it, how come multiple fields of discipline are all converging on the same answer? And I would bet you that what the Living Dinosaur said when he said that is actually true. That if you were to look at the multiple disciplines that revolve around this one issue, that they will all converge on the same answer, being evolution actually being fact. So I'm wondering, how is it that they have multiple points of confirmation for something that apparently is so jacked up?
Well, what are the claims? What are they looking at all the way across the board? That's what I would be saying. Most of it.
Let's just look at the genetic evidence. Let's just look at the genetic evidence now. I don't know what the negative.
Hold on a second. Let me respond to what you said beforehand, because most of what is being looked at in the scientific community is pretty much similar patterns or functions inside of species all the way across the board. 98% of all the species are dead and extinct. So it's not difficult to take and compare the anatomies of these vast majority of complex organisms to their similarities and their diversities. But when you really look at the fossil record, you see sudden emergences of species all the way across the board in these different eras, the Mesozoic era, the Paleozoic era. The good example is this, the Precambrian era. That took about 580 million years, and only 12% of the geological timescale we actually know about. But at the Precambrian era, all of the major phyla seem to already be there. Like, for example, some of these shell-like creatures, the arthropods, and so forth. All of the major phyla are already there.
So you're basically saying because we have species listed and we have nothing before, that therefore that nothing came before.
No, I'm saying two things. I'm saying that 88, I'm saying a couple of things, not two things. I'm saying, one, 88% of the geological timescale we don't know anything about. We only know 12% of the geological timescale, so we can't sit over here and say that we know what's happened. At the earliest of the fossil record, the Precambrian era, there was a sudden emergence of all of the phyla, the vertebrates, the arthropods, all these different types of species. They are there at the fossil record. The complexity is already there. So what's happening is that we don't know what happened there. The honest answer is we don't know what happened in the fossil record. Neither the Christian or the atheist can say scientifically, this is how it happened.
Well,
I think that what we're looking at is that there's a picture of a vast span of time, and that there are sudden emergences of species, and no evidence of one species leading up to the complexity of another species, other than looking at homologous structures and features.
You're saying that the complexity was already there. Well, the complexity was already there in what sense? I mean, the sense that they could survive in the environment that they were in. That pretty much is exactly what we would expect to find given the environments that they were in. I mean, look at the evolution of the jaw, for example. We have a pretty good record of that. Let's also look at the evolution of, for example, our limbs. We have a pretty good record of that too, and we can see, you know, small changes, incremental changes throughout the fossil record. And what you're saying is you're saying two things. You're saying that we don't have any evidence that all came from one point. Well, that's called abiogenesis, and I think you know as well as I do that is a continued field of study where they actually admit to not knowing all the answers, but they don't jump to the conclusion that it was intelligence at the same time. And we also have evolution where you may not have it in one chain, in two chains, or three chains, or four chains. However, when you look at a cumulative case as the fossil record as a whole, everything points to evolution. And I don't understand how that can be misinterpreted, especially when you have multiple disciplines all converging on the same answer with not only the geological record, but also, for example, the genetic evidence that supports that type of conclusion.
Well, I'm going to say this, that's I think you just completely misunderstood what I was trying to say right there. It wouldn't necessarily just be an abiogenesis case that's inside of the Precambrian era. It's the emergence of all the major phyla at the bottom of the fossil record. So you're seeing the opposite of evolution there at the fossil record. You're not seeing small incremental changes. You're seeing at the earliest fossil record that we know, all of the phyla being there already. Now, as for looking at the small incremental changes, or looking at certain things like, for example, in genetics, that's not necessarily the case. In comparing, for example, skateboards or bicycles, that's not going to prove anything. You can get the picture in your head and understand what's being argued there, but that's not proving that one species led to the complexity of another species. There's a burden of proof right there that still isn't met just by comparing certain things. What was it? Apophenia, pattern seeking.
That's a wrong example.
Another thing that you said and you talked about was in genetics. Look at some of the things that they're talking about in genetics. For example, what is it? Retroviral DNA. You got the certain sequences or similar sequences of maybe curve. What was it? Curve K11 or something like that. These certain similar sequences with chimpanzees, and these vast differences and the same coding of retroviral DNA in humans. Well, it's inconsistent across the board, like, for example, in gorillas. So even this, again, another version of pattern seeking in genetics, it doesn't therefore say, well, look, therefore we came from one another. Therefore we all diverge from a simple ancestor. It's just something that you can, draw your conclusion from.
Yeah, but that's a wrong example, because if we're going to say skateboards and bicycles, we have to take what we know beforehand so that we can make the correct conclusions now. One thing we do know is that bicycles and skateboards can't screw each other, let alone reproduce with diversity. We know this, and so we don't apply that same type of thinking to bicycles and skateboards. But what do we see in life, and what do we see in the genetic record, is that you actually do get diversity. I don't look exactly like my dad and mom. Let's say I was born with a slightly bigger nose. Well, that means I can take in more air and I can, outperform a little bit. And that trait is beneficial. And that trait is what would survive to be passed on through the generations, and then next thing you know, survival of the fittest takes its course, yada, 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 blah, blah, blah. That's what we're actually seeing. We don't apply that certain thinking to skateboards or bicycles because we know beforehand that they don't reproduce like we do. Neither does computer programs, nothing like that. So it's a wrong example to give. And I think what's actually being said here is that we're trying to make the process that's been shown to work with biological life seem completely foolish by trying to apply it to something that actually would be foolish, that doesn't disprove the process.
Okay, well then let me use what you just said to hit on two different issues. One issue that you said earlier in the discussion was, well, we don't just say that intelligence did it. You say that, well, we can see that, basically you can see differences, in offspring because we can intermix and interbreed. Well, then the idea is that these small incremental changes can lead to specific complexities, new anatomical features and functions. Can you demonstrate to where these changes, these accumulation of changes or diversities and mixes with different species can produce through time a new anatomical feature?
Hello? 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 I think he lost it again. Hello? Oh, well. Well, this is normally why I don't have these conversations, because his internet connection sucks. And plus, this isn't my forte. I don't study this crap. I'm simply trying to wonder why there is a discrepancy. But apparently he's gone. And if it stops going live, then we'll do this again. However, it's going to be on my channel. I don't know what's going on here. So, AW resistance. Does evolution disprove a creator? No, it doesn't. Evolution does not disprove a creator. You could still have a creator, and he just made evolution, I guess, if you want to think that way. Many Christians do believe in evolution. This is true. And true empiricism is gone. Yeah, Sam, I know. Like I said, I don't study this crap. So, who knows? Many Christians believe in evolution. AW resistance. Yes, that is correct. Does evolution disprove a creator? No, it does not. Let's see. What else is here? Yeah, pretty much. Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, no problem. I like to converse with people who are replying. Oh, you're back. True. You got your mic working?
All right, I'm back. I don't know why that happened, but I'm back. Did you hear anything that I just said before I left?
Absolutely not. You're going to have to repeat.
Okay, so I was going to ask you earlier in the discussion, you said something about how we just jump to conclusions. You don't just say that, or the evolutionists don't just say that. Intelligent design basically just says that, intelligence just did it. That's not what the evolutionists do. So you added on later on that, well, we can actually see diversities and changes with certain species. They can mix. You can have differences in offspring. So the claim is in evolution that these changes in allele frequencies, or these accumulation of changes, can lead up to new anatomical features and functions. I'd ask you then, what would be the evidence for these accumulation of changes leading up to a new anatomical feature and function, like a motor?
A motor?
Yes.
What motor?
The bacterial flagellum.
Oh crap! Didn't this same argument get spouted by Michael Behe? And I forget, how did that end up for him? Because
well, it ended up great, but that was an argument over irreducible complexity. I'm asking you a specific question.
Yeah, and so you're asking, like, how did the flagellum come about? Well, like I said, I don't study this. I can only give you my best guess, but I can see how it would come about. For example, they said that the tool for the bacteria flagellum, like the actual leg and the stuff that would eventually become the motor, actually did have a separate purpose for, and actually still does have separate purposes for, different cells. Again, what are they? Don't know. I'm speaking from memory here. But he says that all the parts are there, and the only thing that needs to happen is for that cell to have some sort of surrounding pressure on it where movement of that particular part would actually be beneficial to it. And only the offspring that can move a little and then eventually move a lot and then eventually move a lot more are going to be the ones to survive better. And this has been said not only in that one documentary that I'm sure you remember me linking you, but it was also said by the scientists. They called to the stand on an entirely separate documentary. So, I mean, it seems to have come about. If you want to go to the big scale, macro scale, I think is the proper term. You can look at it when it comes to the evolution of the whale, where they have fossil evidence to show that the whale species was actually more like I guess, like a miniature land-based animal, a lot shorter, but they compared the anatomy to they compared the skeleton of an old fossil, and they showed that a bunch of pieces for that skeleton were the exact same pieces for the whale. And in fact, one of the main pieces that they point to was a piece within the ear, and also a piece down the spine, and also a piece for the joint of the hinds. And so they said, wow, we have all these pieces that you can't practically tell the difference of, but we found them here. If we found them there, what is the obvious conclusion that one would come to? Again, not necessarily, you can't just say, oh, look at that. These pieces are here by mere coincidence. There has to be a reason that they're there, correct?
Yeah, I would say this, that you're pretty much doing exactly what I've been talking about for a while on my channel.
I don't watch your channel.
Well, I didn't ask you if you watch my channel. I'm saying that you're doing what I did on my channel, and this is for my viewers that are watching me. It's pointed out a lot that what homologous structures, it's the same thing all the way across the board. And it's interesting because you say, well, we just say that, well, intelligence did it. Basically, you're implying that we don't have evidence to support that intelligence did it, which we can get into in a little bit. But you haven't provided evidence just now. You gave us a personal idea or view that, well, look, they look similar in structure or in operation. Therefore, look, you can see, if you can use your imagination, well, one can lead up to a different complexity. Homologous structures or similar shapes and functions, they don't prove that therefore one came from another. What you were talking about earlier, I believe, if that's what you were trying to allude to, was the type 3 secretory system, where it's got this needle-like instrument for injection, and because that's got homologous proteins, that's speculated that if time is given, that it might be able to lead to the complexity of the bacterial flagellum, or it shows, and in the sense of how Ken Miller, I believe, tries to use it, that it's therefore irreducibly complex. That doesn't therefore mean that one complexity will lead to another complexity. And in the reverse, where we're looking at this, motors, turbines, where they come from, they're known to come from creative intelligence. That's not something to where we have to say, well, maybe if we look at it like this, or if we move it in this direction, it'll happen like this. We don't have to speculate or assume or believe anything. The reason why we say that intelligence did it is because the evidence of creation indicates a creator, specific creation, and those specific creations are observed inside of nature.
Yeah, intelligence can do it, but that doesn't mean it did do it. And you're also ignoring the completely valid explanations that show how it can come about naturally. I mean, and we also need to ask the question too, if intelligence really did do it, then how come we have such a very high extinction rate? How come I have wisdom teeth that are currently killing me right now? How come when we look at other properties to other cells, they were once called intelligence, and then we found out, oh, look, nothing intelligent there, when we actually do the investigation. And that's why I look to the people working in the field and seeing what they have to say about, for example, Sam and Fiona and many others on top of that. They're the ones I go to, and we say, oh, hey, look, we can see how one could come to the conclusion that this looks designed. However, just because it looks designed, it may not be designed. And when you actually do further investigation, oh, look, it wasn't designed at all. Here's a perfect, rational explanation that fits what we have been saying the entire freaking time. I mean, that's literally what I'm hearing. That's not evidence for design. That is conjecture based on a personal preference again or towards an idea. It looks designed, therefore it is designed, is not a valid argument.
Well, see, that's again another misunderstanding. The argument isn't that it looks designed, therefore it is designed. The argument is that it functions, operates the same as things that are designed, therefore it is designed. With bushing,
That's the same thing.
with
That's the
bushing,
same thing.
with bushing. No, that's not the same thing. You can look at clouds in the sky and say, well, this looks similar to a human or a car, the shape of it, and looks similar to but it's not the same thing. With the bacterial flagellum, it is the same thing. It operates the same. It has the same equipment used. It's the same thing as a motor. It is a motor. The only difference would be that it's made of different material and it's smaller. And most people understand that the smaller you try to make something, the more difficult it is to try to make anyways to begin with. So there's nothing at all implicating that therefore it wasn't designed.
No, that is exactly the same thing. You're saying it looks designed because it looks the same as an electric motor.
Because you hit on a lot of things right there. I forgot what you said earlier
that's all I said right there. About it being look and design, and then we're jumping to the conclusion that therefore it looks designed, it is designed. And you said, well, it doesn't just look designed, it functions the same. That's what I mean by looks. It looks designed as in it looks the same as the stator and rotor that we see in electric motors. However, if that's the way that biology did it too, all that points to is that biology did the exact same thing. They had the same idea that we had. In fact, if you look at I don't know the name of the species, but it's the world's largest single-celled organism. And what they did was they placed chips down, and these chips were a form of food for this cell. And what happens that they put the goop, whatever the species is, down, and it spread out, it found these chips, and then it made trails, it made tunnels, it made highways to the energy it needs so it can sustain itself. But those chips weren't laid in a random area. They were laid to mimic the continent of Japan. And the highways it chose are the exact same highways that we chose. That doesn't mean that it was designed, or that process was designed by an ultimate creator. It simply means that we have some similarities here. Similarities does not mean that they actually came from it. So your argument really comes down to it looks designed, therefore it is designed. And I think you will agree that that is fallacious thinking.
Well, of course I would agree with that, because first of all, that goes against everything that you're saying right now. Similarities don't equal design. That's the only thing that you're offering is similarities in certain structures and functions. You use the example with the fossil record, for example, or certain features inside of whales, I believe. That doesn't therefore equal design. What equals or what makes your point valid is not similarities, but a known cause to produce an effect. A known cause to produce an effect. That's the main important issue in a scientific theory. A known cause to produce an effect. So when you're saying that, well, changes can lead up to a complexity, like I asked you earlier, can you prove where these complexities can lead to a certain type of anatomical feature and function? And you can just say, well, if you give it enough time, you can see and picture what can happen this way or that way. That's just giving me your idea or your personal beliefs or views on that. And again, when you go back to the bacterium flagellum, it seems like you ignored what I said. When you take a motor and it is built the same way, it is the same way, and you take another motor and it's built the same way, you're not going to say, well, it just looks that way. It just operates that way. It is that way. And likewise, you're not going to say something looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, talks like a duck, therefore it's a cow, because it just doesn't follow that way. It's like you would drop a gate between your reasoning, so that you don't have to lead to the conclusion that you don't want. It's a classic case of denial, ignoring what you're looking at. And I've never heard any scientists at all refer to the bacterium flagellum as not being a motor. It's that every scientist I've ever listened to, whether intelligent design advocate or not, every paper I've read, it's referred to as a molecular motor. You go to the same place with the ATP synthase, how that operates, how that functions. It is a turbine. It is built like a turbine. The only difference with ATP synthase would be proton motive force.
Okay, but like I said, it's not that we're not willing to go to that conclusion. It's just that we have to have a good reason to go to that conclusion. You don't seem to realize that you're doing this, but you're actually making an unjustified, unsupported jump to the conclusion, saying that just because it looks designed, therefore it is designed. It can be exactly like a motor. It can have all the same parts. All that means is that what humanity has done with like Tesla motors, for example, or the Model S, I should say, and what nature has done with the bacteria flagellum just happen to have the same exact thing. But you're saying a known cause to have an effect. Well, I don't know about you. I don't seem to see any evidence whatsoever of a mind creating a germ. I don't seem to see the example or the evidence that God, a timeless, immaterial being, because what does intelligent design, say there? Oh, we're not saying it's just God. We could be saying it's aliens. Well, we don't see any evidence of that. So literally, it is still a jump. No matter how sweet the pie looks, it is still a jump to eat it. And if you eat it, you're just going to assume that's full of apples and not crickets. I do not feel like making that jump until there's actual repeatable evidence that shows, that directly points to, in no uncertain terms, in no other way, to a mind. And that evidence just simply is not there.
Yes, it most certainly absolutely is there. What the intelligent design is an inference of the best explanation. The same type of argumentation or reasoning that evolution goes into. Inference of the best explanation. None of us know how these things happen. We were not there to see any of these things happen. Evolution, abiogenesis, we didn't see those things happen. We have to draw our best conclusions based on our cause and effect here and now. Evolution, we are obviously not here for hundreds of millions of years. We cannot see species A come distinct from species B down the line through millions of years, because we weren't here to see that happen. So what we do is we compare and contrast things that we see in the fossil record, and we test and we do experimentations in our time now to see if the reasoning that complexity A can lead to the complexity B is valid, it's justifiable. This is the type of reasoning that we're going behind intelligent design. Now, the argument is that you have motors and turbines, you have information inside of the cell. All three of these types of functions and structures and operations, they've only been known to come from creative intelligence. So therefore, by our understanding, by our inferences of these explanations, the only conclusion that we have now to come to is to where these things can come from, factually known to come to, is creative intelligence. That's a matter of fact. So when you say, well, you don't see any reason why it's intelligent design, well, that seems to be void of what is actually true. I mean, factually, no matter what position or stance you take, that's a fact. We all know that these things come from creative intelligence. That's not a matter of opinion. That is a straight up fact that's in everybody's face.
No one's denying that fact, though.
What you do,
no one's denying that fact, though.
Because you assume your alternative. You think that, well, you can't basically tell me it can't happen another way. Therefore, well, there's no reason indicating that that's exactly how it happened. Well, the point being is that those that are rational and logical, that are going to stand by the evidence that's available, are the ones that are going to be justified. And it's not any way a problem for us to say, well, you can't say that it can't happen another way, because we're willing to grant that you can help to hold to your alternatives by faith, but that is in no way equivalent to what we're offering here. It's actually inferior, and it is in no way justified.
Actually, no, it's not inferior. And no one is denying that minds can make motors. What we're denying is that minds had a hand in making this motor. You have to basically prove to me that there's no other way for a motor to be made other than through intelligence. Other than that, how else is intelligent design actually testable? How would a scientist go about proving and testing intelligence?
So you said that no one can say that that this motor was built through intelligent design, and I have to prove to you. No, that's absolutely not at all what my attempt is at all when I'm talking in these discussions.
So it is just an idea that has no bearing on any sort of appeal to fact. In that case, why do we hold?
I'm not finishing what I was going to say. You're going to make me slip my thought, and I'm going to forget what you said. No, nobody says that intelligent design. What did you say? See, you made me forget what you just said. What did you say earlier?
I said a lot of things earlier. You want me to repeat?
Yeah, repeat what you just said earlier before you interrupted.
I said, quote, that just because minds can make a motor does not mean that a mind made this motor. Let's start there.
Okay, yeah. So you said that just because intelligence can make a motor does not mean that intelligence made this motor. That's not the way that this reasoning works. That's not the way that, that's like me saying this. Let's just say this. Well, just because, evolution, just because evolution is the only explanation that we have available, and it's actually got the evidence to support it, well, that doesn't mean that it happened this way. Well, of course, it doesn't mean that it happened that way, but if we have no other explanation that can explain the diversity of life, that's what we have to hold to, right? That's what you would say. The evidence is supporting that, so that's what we have to hold to. And it's likewise the exact same thing that you're doing here. You acknowledge that intelligence can produce motors. The question isn't that you're acknowledging that intelligence can produce motors. Why are you rejecting that intelligence can produce motors and holding to something else that you're assuming can produce motors?
No, because we actually have a mechanism in which the complexity of life can come from simple to more complex, or I should say more recent. Everything is complex for the sake of it surviving whatever niche it has happened to find. What I'm saying is this: you're jumping to a conclusion that just because a mind made this motor, that therefore it has to make all motors. And yes. I'm saying, where is the evidence for that assertion?
Well, I think that the evidence for that assertion is pretty obvious. Certain creation that's only come from intelligence based on our inference of the best explanation is going to indicate a creator.
If you just because you say that doesn't make it true.
Well, it does make it true. It makes it a fact.
No, it doesn't.
Hold on a second. If we only know where a motor can come from, you're going to stand by that knowledge. That's not how science works. The way that you think science works is like this. Well, who cares what the evidence is indicating, what the tests or theories have proven? We can't say that therefore is the only way it happened, because we didn't see it happen. We weren't here hundreds of millions of years ago to see it happen. Therefore, it could have happened some other way. I mean, no, it doesn't work that way. You're going to stand by where the evidence has been supported to prove something to happen. That's where you're going to stand by the evidence.
That's
you can
not
say,
how science works.
If you can say that it can happen some sort of other way, go ahead and believe that. But your faith doesn't discredit this fact that based on what we've all seen, the only thing that we've seen where these things can come from, the only knowledge that we have available to where these things can come from is intelligence. So yeah, I'm saying exactly that. Yeah, intelligence is the only place where these things can come from. And I say that with a fact and with an authority, because that is true.
And that's your biggest problem, because that's actually not how science works. Scientists don't go out and say, well, I don't know how else this certain thing could have came about, therefore God. That is called a God of the gaps argument. I don't know,
that's not,
therefore God.
Correct, and that's not what I'm saying at all. You're doing things in the reverse. You're doing things in the reverse. No, this is what I'm doing. I'm doing what everybody else does in science. What do? The evidence that is available based on their cause and effect, they're going to stand by that knowledge known rather than alternatives assumed to be the case. The God of the gaps argument means that we don't know, therefore it was a God that done it. That's not what we're saying. If there is a cause, if there is a cause and there is an effect, that means you're appealing to your knowledge, which you know where certain things have come from. That's not saying we don't know, therefore God did it. It's saying that we do know, therefore it was a creator, not even necessarily a God, a creator that did it, because the evidence supports that it was a creator.
You're conflating two different things.
What you're saying in the reverse is that you're just saying, well, you can't say that it absolutely happened this way. You're just saying that it happened all the way across the board because it only happened this way, but you have no reason to say that it didn't happen any other way. Well, no, what we're saying is that based on the evidence, this is where it's come from. We don't have any reason to believe that. We don't have any reason to believe that it happened any other way.
You're conflating two different things here, and I'm surprised you're not able to see it. You're saying we have evidence to show that a mind created this motor. This particular motor that goes in this particular car, or this particular motor that goes in this particular tool. It created this particular motor in this particular structure.
Absolutely.
I want to see evidence that a mind created this particular motor in this particular cell. Do you have that? Yes or no?
Yes, the evidence would be the deterministic type of foresight that you see that took to place those components in a coordinated fashion. What I
So
mean
I
by
don't
that,
know,
hold on a second,
therefore God.
hold on a second. Yeah, therefore God. They're not therefore God. I think that God is a different argument that we can
Or
do.
therefore an intelligent mind, whatever. You're essentially saying the same thing.
Certain creation that is only known to come from intelligence is obviously evidence of a creator behind those things. That's the fact.
No,
But
it means that you just can't think of any
mixing
other
everything
way.
up right here. Hold on a second. We need to pay very close attention to something right here. Back up. We ask you where your evidence could be for new anatomical features and functions being developed like motors. You don't know. You can't really give an argument for that. You can't prove how that can happen. Only explaining homologous structures of what you've heard somebody else say or talk about. You don't have any evidence for that. You say, well, we know that intelligence can produce that. You say it in a way to where, well, yes, intelligence can produce that, but that doesn't mean that it happened all the way across the board. So in your own assertion right there, what you're doing right here is you're acknowledging a knowledge that is available, but you're saying that just because it's happened that way, that doesn't mean that it applies all the way across the board. Well, what reason do you give us? What reason? I want you to give us a good explanation here. What reason can you give me or the other Christians going to be watching this channel to not accept the only known explanation available?
Because with the motors that we know of that have been produced by mind, we actually have evidence that they were supported by mind to begin with. So if you are going to tell me that this motor is created with a mind, like for example, the one in the Tesla, I can show you evidence of that. I can show you minds making that motor. I can take you to the Tesla factory if Elon Musk would be so kind. I can show you it being put into the car built by human hands. Absolutely. I can show you the programs that they actually had to go through to make that motor, to design that motor to make it as efficient as possible. I can show you that. What do we have with the cell? We don't have any factories. We don't have any mind. We don't even have a name for the mind. We see no hands. We see nothing. What you're saying is just because it looks designed, it looks like this, means that it came about the exact same way. It's the watchmaker's argument. And
you can call it the watchmaker's argument all you want. I don't really care if you call it the watchmaker's argument. I don't really care. I think that what I care about is that this little silly game that you're playing right here. I mean, it's an inference of the best explanation. And you talking about, well, we can actually.
It's not a best explanation, though.
Things we can see. Well, it is the best.
You're assuming
it's the only explanation that we have available that can cause these things to happen. Hold on a second. It's the only explanation that we have available that we can cause things to happen. You're just basically saying, well, you can't say that it's the only way that it can happen. You're not giving us a reason to prove to me that it's the only way that it can happen. Therefore, I'm not going to accept the only explanation. Yes, it is. If it's the only explanation, it's the best explanation because it's the only one
not the best explanation.
But going back to what you just said earlier, to where you can trace things back to. Hold on a second. Hold on a second. Don't interrupt. We can go back to a root source, and you give a good example of that. You can go back and see, you can see the blueprints, you can see where these things have happened. You can prove that factually that certain things were produced. You can go to a root source with cars and motors and the Tesla coil or anything like that. You know it, that they've come from intelligence. Why? Because we've got a known cause going back to a root source, knowing that it's been produced to produce these effects. Intelligence has produced these specific types of effects. Now we take this knowledge, this available understanding, and we apply it to where we're seeing motors inside of the cell. Our inference of the best explanation to where we understand where these things come from factually is from creative intelligence. Now, to say that, well, we didn't see that happen with the cell, or we didn't see this happen with the motors inside of the cell, is missing a very big point here. We don't see anything happen all the way across the board with anything that happened 500 million years ago, 4 billion years ago, anything like that, because we weren't there to see those things happen. We apply our understanding now on our time with our cause and effect to make the best explanation for what we think could have happened back then.
Yeah, again, it's what you think. And so you're basically saying, I don't know how else this could have happened, therefore God or mind or whatever. It's a classic God of the gaps argument. And the reason why I say
that's
that
not the God of the gaps argument.
It is because what you're saying is
the God of the gaps argument
to motors.
The God of the gaps argument doesn't mean
that are different motors.
You reworded it.
That have a different. That they have a different. We have different motors, and we have actual evidence to show that they came from a mind. You have a motor that looks similar, but you don't have evidence that it came from a mind. And I'm waiting for that evidence, and until it's brought forth, you're not going to make me make that jump.
Okay.
It is an intellectually dishonest position to have.
And you're being in denial. I mean, going back to what you
denial,
Going back to what you said earlier, the God of the gaps argument. That's not what the God of the gaps argument is.
Yes, it is.
The God of the gap. No, you reworded it. The God of the gaps argument. Hold on a second.
I'm just acknowledging the facts.
Hold on a second. Well, just stop for a second. The God of the gaps argument means we don't know, therefore God did it. You're saying you don't know how else it could have happened, therefore a God did it. That's a different. Well, that's not what the God of the gaps argument is. The God of the gaps argument is we don't know, therefore God did it. Again, apply that same type of reasoning with science. You're going to stand across the board with what you know rather than what somebody else is telling you or assuming to be the case, because you can give your evidence, you can give your peer-reviewed articles, you can give your alternatives. I mean, just think about that for a second. And if we're going to apply that same type of standard in science, every single scientific theory that is out there is therefore there's no reason to accept it, because you know what, somebody else could have some sort of information, and even though that's the evidence available, screw it, we don't know. It's just a gap in our knowledge. It's a fallacious type of reason.
It's not available for that one thing, though. It's conflating.
Now you said something else later, and you keep on saying this, that these things, they look designed, or they look they you know, I'm bringing up turbines, motors, and
it's not to this one.
They look similar. Motor. Okay, well, ATP synthase then. Do you know how it operates?
I'm not talking about ATP synthase. I'm talking about this motor issue that you keep going on about.
Okay, well, I'm bringing up all of them. We'll go through all of them. We'll go through.
I'm not going to go through all of them. We're going
to go through all of them because this is my hangout.
You go through it, and I'll ignore it so I can go back to the point that we were originally talking about. If you need to get out of your system,
this is what you mentioned at the end of your point, so I'm going to hit on your point. Don't get defensive, all right? We don't need to
bring up ATP synthase.
We don't need to talk about this into a confrontational thing, okay? We're going to hit on everything that you're saying. All right, so you're just saying that these things, the motors, the turbines, and the information, we're going to hit on all of those because I mentioned all those in
just motors and turbines.
So we're going to hit on all these things, okay?
Didn't bring up anything about informations. I brought up motors.
I did. The turbines inside of the side.
I didn't.
The turbine,
so
I don't care.
We're going to go on that.
You're not the only one in this discussion, okay? So don't be defensive. Just listen to
I'm the only one you're talking to, dipshit.
Okay, well, yeah, exactly. I'm the one in here, and I get to bring things up too. So shut up and just listen, okay?
How about this?
Synthase. No. ATP synthase. Can you explain to me how that operates and functions instead of just saying that it just looks that way? Can you actually get into it and explain it?
Okay, so going back to the motor, if you have a motor...
We'll get to the motor in a second. We'll get to a motor. I promise you, we're going to get to the motor in a second.
You haven't done that. True, if you are refusing to have the conversation, then say so right now. Because you're saying, I don't know how it did happen.
Okay, stop for a second. Stop for a second. No, stop for, you're being defensive. This has happened before when I've asked you, when I've talked to you about certain things. I'm going to decrease your volume. I've asked you and talked to you about this before, and I want to make sure there's no interruptions. And this has happened repeatedly. And I noticed it happened. He left the hangout. Now, he did this last time. I want you guys to go watch the Matt Schlick discussion. And the Matt Schlick discussion recently, when it came time for them to actually talk about technical detail to see if he understood what happened, you know, before the universe, he couldn't give an explanation. He became defensive. Now we're seeing him do the same thing here again. In the past, I've had discussions with him before, and, you know, I tried to, you know, talk to him, and he seems to like not want to listen to what we're saying. And the same thing happened before. I had asked him, okay, how does this work and how does this function? Are you just ignoring what I'm saying, or you just want to keep on stating what you want to say? And he repeatedly in different discussions says, I don't know how it happened. I don't know how it operates, or, you know, I can't say how it operates this way. In different ways, he would say the same thing. So we have an individual here that's just being stubborn all the way across the board, not being able to give an explanation to anything, not being able to even understand what the argument is about anyways, but speaking authoritatively as if he can draw some sort of conclusion. This is a classic case of somebody that's in denial, somebody that's refusing to listen to what the other person is saying and wants to stick to what he wants to stick to. That's it, guys. I think that discussion went great. God bless.